What's up, world history kids? Hope you're doing well. Today is April 16th, 9:26 a.m. And welcome to another edition of Mr. Tomei's unboxing action figurine video. I got Steph Curry here, fresh out the line. You can see pretty realistic. Yeah, the arms moved really nice. The basketball really well textured. The face with the mouthpiece to the side. You can do some exorcism things. Okay, just kidding. We're actually going to do our last slide of lecture notes for the week. So, the past couple days we've talked about NATO, Warsaw Pact, the Berlin Airlift, the Berlin Blockade. Today we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about the Chinese Civil War, and we're going to talk about M.A.D, or mutually assured destruction. We're going to talk about what that means and how this all plays into the unique relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States during this time period. Steph, you ready to go? Yeah, I'm ready to go, guys. Let's go. All right, let's do it. Go to slide 15 on your notes, please, for me. Slide 15 on your notes for me. I'll give you a second if you wish to get there. All right. So, mutually assured destruction. What does this mean? This is an acronym. It also has a word meaning for pretty much what would be nuclear missile end of day destruction. We're about in the 1950s right now, 1940s, 1950s. And right now there's only two countries in the world that have access to nuclear weapons. There's the United States, there's the Soviet Union. As we're going to learn next week, the reason these two can't work together and why they're opposed is because of philosophical differences on democracy, government, and economics. And we're going to talk about that next week. But what we do know is that they're on two different sides, and they're the only countries that have nuclear weapons. And if these two sides were to ever really get into it, they both have the potential to launch enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world. That's why it's known as mutually assured destruction. The idea is, let's say this side is the Soviet Union. Let's say this side is the United States. Let's say the Soviet Union does something to make the United States angry. And in response, the United States launches a nuclear bomb. That's the sound a nuclear bomb makes. Now, the Soviet Union, as a response, would probably launch one of their own nuclear bombs. So it'd go. That's the sound a nuclear bomb makes as well. But eventually, what would happen is you would get this back and forth of launching nuclear bombs at each other. Well, the problem with that is eventually you launch enough nuclear weapons, it's enough to send the world towards collapse. There's issues with nuclear weapons, obviously, in terms of radiation, how far radiation can spread in the air. The idea of a nuclear fallout, a nuclear winter, as sometimes it's called, where there's so much radiation in the atmosphere that it creates like a blanket that covers us from the sun, and so pretty much the earth would kind of freeze and we'd go back to like an ice age. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't take that many nuclear weapons. Maybe about at one time, I don't know, maybe a dozen to 24, somewhere in that range is all it would really take. Maybe even less if they were really big nuclear bombs to really cause the end of the world. So mutually assured destruction is the idea that both sides know that they're capable of not only destroying each other, right, but destroying the entire world. To say something is mutual means there's an understanding, right? That it's equal, there's an understanding. Assured obviously means guaranteed, and destruction means destruction. So that's what mutually assured destruction means. It also has a cool, when you spell it out, it spells out mad. Mad is often to use sometimes as described as crazy or insane, like to say, oh, that person's mad or insane. It's not as commonly used anymore, but sometimes you'll hear it more in like British kind of like, or proper British English vocabulary to describe someone as mad as someone like they're crazy. And that's what this idea was, is like the idea that if either side got a little upset, we could just launch nuclear weapons at each other and that would cause the end of the world. It is kind of a little crazy. So that's mutually assured destruction. Take a second too. You can do it now if you want to pause the video or after this video. Watch the first 5 minutes of that YouTube link. It shows what the United States government was telling kids in school to do during the 1950s, 60s, in the event of a nuclear attack. It's actually kind of funny because there's not much you can do to hide from a nuclear bomb, but when you watch the video, you'll see how kind of ridiculous the United States government was in trying to quell the fears of people and trying to think that they could be safe in the event of a nuclear attack. Watch like the first 5 minutes. That's all you need to do with the other video. Okay? So let's move on. We're going to talk about the Chinese Civil War, and that'll pretty much wrap us up for the day, and I'll have some closing announcements for the week. So let's go to slide 16. So, remember the last time we talked about China? China takes that L, Fortnite dance. Okay. So that's the last time we talked about China. It was back in the imperialism unit. And we're going to pick it up kind of from where we left off. We're going to fast forward through some things, but this is like a quick overview on Chinese history up to today. So right before World War II takes off and right before the Japanese Empire really starts expanding its territory, there were two main groups that were fighting for control of China. There was a group known as the Nationalists. They were led by this guy known as Chiang Kai-shek, and the Communists led by Mao Zedong. The Nationalists were more of a democratic, capitalist, forward type of group. They were supported by the U.S. and NATO because both the U.S. and NATO countries are democratic and capitalist. And we're going to talk about the difference between capitalism and communism more next week. The Communists were communists and were supported by the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. The Chinese Civil War is going to be the first of many, 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 many examples going forward of wars where the United States supports one side and the Soviet Union supports another side, and they kind of play like coach for each side. What you're going to learn is the United States and the Soviet Union never directly fight each other during Cold War on a grand scale. They do so through other countries, through spying, through other various forms of competition, and we're going to talk about that throughout this unit. But a big thing to remember is the United States and the Soviet Union never directly fight each other in a massive scale war. They use other countries. They're kind of like the puppet master, and they pick sides. And the Chinese Civil War is an example of this. Let's go ahead and go to slide 17. The Chinese Civil War is a very long civil war. In slide 16, you saw I put the date 1927 goes to 1950. That's because the dates of the fighting are infrequent. China is conquered by Japan for a long period of those years until Japan is defeated in 1945. China really isn't a whole self-sufficient country. So the real big end-all fighting starts kicking up in 1945 after the Japanese are kicked out of Japan, or kicked out of China, excuse me. And on slide 17, this kind of shows you the differences between the two sides. So you'll see on the left-hand side, the communists and kind of the area they control, so on and so forth, and then the nationalists on the other side. The biggest thing I think you should look at is look at public support. For the communists, they have a lot of support from poor people, the peasants, farmers. But if you look on the nationalists, they're supported by wealthy landowners. You also look at military organization. On the left, they have experienced, motivated guerrilla warfare tactics for the communists. On the right, you had ineffective, corrupt, and poor morale. Um, we'll talk more about especially why poor people might support communism. But if you just look at military organization, you'd probably say the communists have the upper hand. All right, so let's keep moving. We're going to go to pretty much fast forward to who wins. Drum roll, please. Ta-da! The communists win. This is in slide 18 here. Communism prevails in China. The nationalists were pretty close to winning the war and eliminating the communists, but the communists survived. They regrouped during World War II out in the more rural parts of China. They gained a lot of support from the poor and the peasants and the farmers. And then finally, when the war ended, the Chinese moved back from the farmland kind of towards the coastal areas of China where a lot of the population is, and started, capturing big cities and capturing the capital and other big infrastructure, railways and such. And eventually the nationalists were pushed all the way out of the country to an island country that today is known as Taiwan. This is the point of the class where I'd go to Google Maps and I'd show you some things, but obviously I can't do that. So instead, go ahead if you want to know where Taiwan is, just look it up on Google Maps, but there's also going to be some images here of that as well. Okay? Let's go to slide 19 and kind of the fallout from all this. Okay? So, as a result, China wins the war. Or the communists win the war, in China. The Communist Party takes over China, and ever since, China has been crafted by communist beliefs, values, policies, politics, freedoms, economic principles. And as a result, China has evolved very different than some of the other countries around it, like South Korea or Japan, which are much more, you could say, are much more capitalist or more kind of like progressive and democratic. China itself, in communism, and we'll talk more about this, but China for a long time had and to this day has very strict policies on like what freedoms you have. For a long time, there were rules on how many kids you could have. There was the one-child policy, which is pretty infamous in China. You can only have one kid. And a lot of these have to do with kind of like communist hardcore values. We'll talk more about that next week. But Taiwan evolved differently. If you look in slide 19, Taiwan is this relatively large island off the coast of kind of southeastern China. Technically today, as we kind of talked about Hong Kong, Taiwan is considered a part of China, but it's also relatively and very independent. China sees Taiwan as a part of China, while a lot of Taiwanese people see themselves as an independent country. Most people that live in Taiwan are descendants of the losing side of the Civil War, the Nationalist Party. So they have certain feelings about what happened in the Civil War, and they believe, that they are still right and that they want to have their own self-governance on this island known as Taiwan. The image there on the right shows you kind of their relations today. China is a bigger country. It has a bigger military force. And it has a very rocky relationship. Eventually, just like Hong Kong, the plan is to integrate Taiwan to be a part of mainland China again, to be one China in the coming decades. Taiwan might not be down for that, and that's a problem we might have to face in a few decades. And it's tough, especially for us in the United States, because we supported the nationalists and we supported Taiwan. Even to this day, while we formally support China, and we don't have an official embassy in Taiwan, We unofficially kind of support Taiwan. We sell them weapons. We have a lot of American businesses that are set up over there. And that's because Taiwan, unlike China, is a capitalist type of region and country. Taiwan is more open to democracy, more open to Western values, more open to a capitalist model of economics. And if you were to go to Beijing and then you were to go to like Taiwan, if you were to go to China and Taiwan, you would notice different way of life, even though the two are really close to each other and technically kind of almost the same thing. So the relations between China and Taiwan are interesting. It's tense. And depending on what happens in the coming decades, some people think this is where the next world war might start. Tough to say, but we'll just have to keep an eye on it. You can read more about into this and watch YouTube videos on it. They can explain it in more detail if you want. But this is just the basics that I wanted you to understand. So just to recap for today's video, the most important things that I want you to know is that you need to know what mutually assured destruction is. What does that mean? It just means like nuclear destruction between the Soviet Union, the United States. They both have the power to destroy the world and each other. And then the Chinese Civil War. Know that it was a war fought between a communist side that was supported by the Soviet Union and then a capitalist side, that were called the nationalists, that were supported by the United States. Communists win. They control pretty much all of China. The nationalists lost. They fled to an island off the coast of China, and it was Taiwan. It's a semi-independent country, and it has a unique relationship between with China today. Some last things. This is the last video for the week. I'm not going to give you a video tomorrow because I want you to get the work done. Make sure to turn in all your work tomorrow. The last time I'm going to check my emails and start putting things in the gradebook is around 3:30, which would be about the time contractually I would be done on a school day. So if you email me something after, it's going to be late. I'll make sure to make a post of that when I post this video. But make sure you turn in everything tomorrow at 3:30. If it's after, you're late. Okay, if I don't hear from you by 3:30 tomorrow, you're going to be absent. Okay, so make sure you get the work in. If you have any questions, email me. Steph, you got any things to say? No? Don't call him.